I found out my well was feeding the entire neighborhood on a Tuesday afternoon when Brenda Morrison showed up at my door with a clipboard and an expression that could curdle milk. "Mr. Palmer," she said, not waiting for me to invite her in, "we need to discuss your flagrant violation of HOA Ordinance 17-4-B. I blinked at her, still holding the sandwich I'd been about to bite into. "I'm sorry, what?" Brenda was the president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, a position she'd held for the past 6 years with the iron grip of someone who genuinely believed that mismatched mailbox colors were a threat to civilization. She was 52, wore her blonde hair in that specific suburban mom cut that somehow required speaking to multiple managers, and had perfected the art of the disapproving stare. "Your lawn," she said, gesturing dramatically at my front yard. "It's half an inch too long according to our regulations. I've documented it." She held up her phone, showing me what appeared to be several photos of my grass taken from different angles. "Brenda, it's grass. It grows. The rules clearly state that lawns must be maintained between 2 and 2.5 inches. Yours is measuring at 3 inches in several spots." I rubbed my face, feeling the beginnings of a headache. "I mowed it 3 days ago." "Then you need to mow it more frequently." She made a note on her clipboard. "This is your first official warning. If the issue isn't corrected within 48 hours, you'll receive a fine of $50. $50 for grass that's half an inch too long? Rules are rules, Mr. Palmer. They're what separate us from chaos." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and there's a board meeting next Thursday at 7. Your attendance would be appreciated. We're discussing some important updates to community standards." I watched her march back to her white SUV, which was parked in front of my house like she was conducting a military inspection. This was my life now. I'd moved to Meadowbrook Estates in Carson City, Nevada 2 years ago, thinking I'd found a perfect slice of suburban peace. The development was new, built on what used to be ranch land about 15 miles outside the city proper. My property was one of the originals, actually part of the old ranch that had been subdivided when the developer bought most of the land. I'd purchased my 3 acres and the old ranch house from the original owner's grandson, who'd kept this parcel separate from the main sale. What I hadn't fully appreciated at the time was that my property included the original well that had served the ranch for decades. It was a good well, drilled deep into an aquifer that had never run dry even during Nevada's worst droughts. When the developer built Meadowbrook Estates, they'd run municipal water lines to most of the neighborhood, but my property and 3 others on my street used well water. It had been part of the appeal, actually. No water bill, unlimited supply, and the water tasted better than the city stuff. I spent the next day doing what Brenda commanded, mowing my lawn to within an inch of its life. Literally. I set the mower so low I was practically scalping the dirt. If she wanted between 2 and 2.5 inches, she was getting exactly 2 inches. Thursday evening rolled around, and despite every instinct telling me to stay home, I drove to the community center for the HOA meeting. The Meadowbrook Estates Community Center was one of those bland, modern buildings that looked like every other suburban community center in America. All beige stucco and fake stone accents. Inside, about 30 people sat in folding chairs facing a table where Brenda held court alongside 4 other board members. I recognized a few neighbors, including Tom Garrett from 2 streets over and Linda Wu, who lived in the house directly behind mine. "Wonderful, we have a quorum," Brenda announced, checking her watch. "Let's begin. First order of business, the spring landscaping assessment." For the next 20 minutes she droned on about mulch requirements, approved flower species, and the absolute necessity of maintaining uniform hedge heights. I zoned out, studying the acoustic ceiling tiles and wondering what I'd done to deserve this particular circle of suburban hell. "Now, moving on to our main topic," Brenda said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "Water conservation and community infrastructure." That got my attention. As you all know, Nevada faces ongoing drought conditions. Our development needs to be proactive about water usage. She clicked a remote and a PowerPoint presentation appeared on the screen behind her. The board has been reviewing water consumption data for the neighborhood. A chart appeared showing water usage by street. My street, Ponderosa Way, showed significantly lower municipal water consumption than the others. "We've noticed some irregularities," Brenda continued. "Specifically 4 properties on Ponderosa Way that show minimal municipal water usage. After investigation, we've determined these properties are using private wells." She said, "Private wells, like I was running a meth lab." While this was apparently legal when these properties were developed, it creates an unfair advantage. These homeowners pay nothing for water while the rest of us bear the full cost of municipal services. I raised my hand. "Excuse me, but that doesn't make sense. We're not connected to the municipal system, so we're not costing anyone anything." Brenda's smile could have frozen lava. "Mr. Palmer, how nice of you to join the discussion. The issue is one of equity. Everyone in Meadowbrook Estates should bear equal costs for services I don't use. The board is proposing a new ordinance requiring all property to connect to municipal water within 6 months. This will ensure uniformity and fairness across the community. You want me to pay to cap my well and run new lines to the municipal system? That would cost thousands of dollars, approximately $8,000 to $12,000, according to our research. The board feels this is a reasonable expense to ensure community standards. I stood up, feeling heat rise in my chest. That's insane. My well has been here for 70 years. It's grandfathered in. You can't just force me to abandon it. Actually, Mr. Palmer, if you review your HOA covenant, Section 12 clearly states that the board has authority over all utility infrastructure within the development. My well isn't part of your development. My property predates Meadowbrook Estates by 50 years. Brenda's smile never wavered. Your property became part of Meadowbrook Estates when you signed the covenant. All properties within our boundaries fall under HOA jurisdiction. The vote will take place at our next board meeting in 2 weeks. I suggest you use that time to obtain quotes from licensed plumbers. I looked around the room, expecting someone to object to this madness. A few people wouldn't meet my eyes. Most looked either indifferent or vaguely supportive of Brenda's insanity. "This is theft," I said flatly. "You're trying to force me to spend thousands of dollars to solve a problem that doesn't exist. Mind your tone, Mr. Palmer. Accusations like that could be considered defamatory." Brenda shuffled her papers. Moving on to the next item, proposed restrictions on outdoor furniture colors. I walked out, my hands shaking with anger. In the parking lot, Linda Wu caught up with me. "Yusuf, wait," she called. I stopped by my truck. Linda was in her mid-40s, a software engineer who worked from home. We'd chatted a few times over the back fence. "That was completely out of line," she said. "I can't believe Brenda is actually trying to force you to cap your well. She's serious about it too. Did you see her face? She's on a power trip. She's been getting worse every year." Linda glanced back at the community center. "My husband and I have been talking about moving. The HOA fees keep going up, and Brenda keeps finding new things to regulate. Last month, she tried to ban vegetable gardens in front yards. Did it pass? Barely failed. 3 votes against, 2 for." She shook her head. "Look, I don't know if this helps, but you should talk to a lawyer. I don't think they can force you to cap a well that predates the HOA. Property rights in Nevada are pretty strong. I'll look into it. Thanks, Linda." I drove home fuming, my mind racing through the implications. $8,000 to $12,000 to solve a problem that existed only in Brenda Morrison's control freak imagination. And for what? So I could pay a monthly water bill on top of the expense of connecting to the municipal system. The next morning, I called 3 real estate attorneys in Carson City. The first 2 didn't handle HOA disputes. The third, a man named Richard Chen, agreed to see me that afternoon. His office was in a modest building downtown, decorated with the kind of generic professionalism that suggested competence without flash. Richard was in his late 30s, wearing a dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. "So," he said, after I'd explained the situation, "your HOA wants to force you to abandon a functional well and connect to municipal water. That's the summary, yeah. And your property predates the HOA by about 50 years. This was the original ranch house for the property that became Meadowbrook Estates. When the developer bought the land, the owner's grandson kept this parcel and sold it to me separately." Richard leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Did you sign an HOA covenant when you purchased the property?" "I did. The real estate agent said it was standard stuff. Rules about lawn maintenance, noise ordinances, architectural guidelines. Nobody mentioned anything about wells." "Do you have a copy of that covenant?" I pulled it up on my phone and forwarded it to him. He spent several minutes reading through it, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "Okay," he said finally. "Here's the situation. You did sign the covenant, which does give the HOA fairly broad authority over property standards. However, there's a legal principle called prior existing use that generally protects infrastructure that predated the HOA. Your well qualifies, so they can't force me to cap it? It's not that simple. They can try. Whether they'd succeed in court is another question." He tapped his pen on the desk. "The HOA covenant has language about utility infrastructure, but it's vague. A good argument could be made that it applies to new construction, not existing infrastructure. But fighting them would mean litigation, and litigation is expensive. How expensive? Probably more than just connecting to municipal water, unfortunately. That's the leverage HOAs have. They know most people can't afford to fight them legally even when the HOA is wrong." I felt my stomach sink. "So I'm screwed either way?" "Not necessarily. There are a few approaches. First, I'd recommend appearing at the board meeting when they vote on this ordinance. Make your objections clear and on the record. If they pass it anyway, you can file an appeal with the board, then potentially take it to the full HOA membership. Sometimes these things fall apart when exposed to sunlight, and if that doesn't work, Then you'd need to decide if you want to litigate or comply. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Often, just having a lawyer send a letter is enough to make an HOA back down. They don't want legal expenses either. I left Richard's office feeling marginally better but still furious. I spent the weekend researching Nevada water rights law, HOA regulations, and property rights. What I learned was frustrating. HOAs in Nevada had tremendous power, but that power wasn't unlimited. The problem was enforcing the limits required money and time that most homeowners didn't have. Monday morning, I got a certified letter from the HOA. My heart sank as I opened it. "Dear Mr. Palmer," it began in Brenda's unmistakable officious tone. "This letter serves as official notice of multiple violations of Meadowbrook Estates covenants and regulations. Violation 1. Lawn maintenance standards not met as of inspection date May 22. Fine assessed $50. Violation 2. Unapproved modification to property landscaping. Fine assessed $100. Violation 3. Outdoor trash receptacle visible from street. Fine assessed $75. Total fines $225. Payment is due within 30 days. I walked outside to see what she was talking about. My lawn was exactly 2 inches tall. I'd measured it myself. The unapproved modification appeared to be the vegetable garden I'd planted along the side of my house, which wasn't visible from the street and which no regulation prohibited. The trash receptacle violation was absurd since my garbage cans were in the same place they'd always been, behind a fence screen that met every guideline in the HOA handbook. This was retaliation. Pure and simple. Brenda was punishing me for pushing back against her well mandate. I took photos of everything, documented the measurements of my lawn, and called Richard Chen again. "She's harassing you," he said after I described the violations. "This is good, actually. It establishes a pattern of retaliatory behavior. Keep documentation of everything. Photos, dates, times. If she keeps this up, it strengthens your case that the HOA is acting in bad faith. So I should just pay these bogus fines? For now, yes. Pay under protest in writing. State clearly that you're paying to avoid further harassment but that you dispute the validity of the violations. This creates a paper trail." I wrote a check for $225 with a letter explaining that I was paying under protest and disputing each violation. It physically hurt to mail it. The next board meeting was the following Thursday. I arrived early, armed with a folder full of documentation. Richard had agreed to attend with me, which I figured would send a message that I was serious. The community center was more crowded this time. Word had apparently spread about the well controversy. I saw the other 3 property owners who had wells all looking as nervous as I felt. Brenda called the meeting to order with her usual efficiency. She went through the standard preliminaries, then reached the main agenda item. Motion to adopt Ordinance 23-06, requiring all properties within Meadowbrook Estates to connect to municipal water systems within 6 months. Discussion? One of the board members, a man named Frank Peterson, cleared his throat. "I'm not sure I understand the urgency of this. If these properties have functioning wells, why force them to change? It's about uniformity and fairness, Frank. We've discussed this, but they're not costing us anything. Their wells are completely independent." Brenda's expression tightened. "The issue is more complex than that. There are liability concerns, water quality issues, and questions about property values." I raised my hand. "Can I speak to those points? You'll have an opportunity during public comment. This directly affects my property." "I'd like to address the board's concerns now." Richard leaned forward. "Mr. Palmer has a right to respond to allegations about his property, Madam President. I'd advise allowing him to speak." Brenda's eyes flicked to Richard, registering his presence for the first time. "And you are?" Richard Chen, representing Mr. Palmer in this matter. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Brenda's smile became fixed and plastic. "How formal." "Very well, Mr. Palmer, you may address the board." I stood, gripping my folder. "You mentioned liability concerns. My well is on my property, properly maintained, and has been functioning safely for 70 years. There's no liability to the HOA. You mentioned water quality issues. I have my well tested annually by a certified lab. The water exceeds all EPA standards." I pulled out the test results and held them up. "These are from last month." "You mentioned property values. I'd argue that forcing homeowners to spend $12,000 on unnecessary infrastructure improvements would hurt property values more than a few private wells." "Your personal opinion on property values isn't relevant," Brenda said. "Neither is yours, apparently. Do you have any actual data showing that properties with wells sell for less?" Frank Peterson spoke up again. "He's got a point, Brenda. What's the actual justification for this ordinance?" "I've explained the justification. You've made assertions. That's not the same thing." Another board member, a woman named Carol Singh, nodded. "I'm inclined to agree with Frank. This seems like a solution looking for a problem." Brenda's face flushed. "Fine. Since the board seems unwilling to act responsibly, let me be more direct. There's a water infrastructure concern that affects the entire development. Our municipal water system has been experiencing pressure issues on Ponderosa Way. The engineering assessment suggests that's because 4 properties aren't connected to the system, which affects the pressure calculations. This was news to me. Do you have that engineering assessment? It's confidential, convenient. You're asking me to spend $12,000 based on a confidential report I'm not allowed to see? Richard stood. Madam President, if the HOA is making infrastructure decisions based on engineering assessments, those assessments are HOA documents that members have a right to review. I'd like to formally request a copy of that report. I'll take that under advisement. You'll provide it within the statutory time frame or we'll file a motion to compel. This isn't optional. The meeting was degenerating rapidly. Frank Peterson called for a postponement of the vote until the engineering assessment could be reviewed. Carol Singh seconded. Brenda looked like she wanted to argue but called for a vote. 3 board members voted to postpone. Brenda and 1 other voted against. Fine, Brenda said icily. This matter is postponed pending review of the engineering documentation. Meeting adjourned. In the parking lot, Frank Peterson caught up with me. He was in his 60s. Retired from some kind of engineering job himself. That was educational, he said. I've been on the board for 2 years and I've never seen Brenda pull out a mysterious engineering report before. You think she's making it up? I think she's used to getting her way and doesn't like being questioned, but here's the thing. I know the engineer who designed the water system for this development. His firm's local. I'm going to give him a call, see if he knows anything about pressure issues on Ponderosa Way. I'd appreciate that. No promises, but something smells off about this whole thing. He glanced back at the community center. Between you and me, Brenda's been getting more aggressive lately. I think she sees the HOA as her personal fiefdom. Some of us on the board are getting tired of it. That was encouraging, at least. I drove home feeling like maybe I wasn't completely alone in this fight. 2 days later, Frank called me. Yusuf, it's Frank Peterson. I talked to the engineer. He says there's absolutely nothing wrong with the water pressure on Ponderosa Way. In fact, he was confused when I asked because the system's performing better than the original specifications. So Brenda was lying about the engineering assessment? Either lying or she commissioned some kind of second opinion without telling the rest of the board. Either way, it's not good. I've called for an emergency board meeting to discuss this. It's Monday at 7. Monday's meeting was tense from the start. Frank had clearly been talking to the other board members because Brenda was on the defensive before she even called the meeting to order. I understand there are questions about the engineering assessment I mentioned, she began. Damn right there are questions, Frank said. I spoke with Tom Hendricks at Hendricks Engineering. He designed our water system. He says there are 0 pressure issues on Ponderosa Way. I was referring to a different assessment. From whom? Brenda shuffled papers. I consulted with an independent expert. Name? I don't have to answer that. Actually, you do. HOA funds can't be spent without board approval. If you hired an engineer using HOA money, that's embezzlement. If you hired one with your own money and presented it as an official HOA document, that's fraud. The meeting exploded into argument. Carol Singh demanded to see receipts for any engineering work. The other board members piled on. Brenda tried to maintain control but was clearly losing ground. Finally, she slammed her hand on the table. Fine, I didn't commission a formal engineering report. But I consulted with someone who knows about water systems, and he confirmed there could be pressure issues. Who? Frank demanded. My brother-in-law. He's a plumber. The silence that followed was deafening. Let me get this straight, Carol said slowly. You told us there was an engineering assessment about water pressure problems. What you actually had was a conversation with your brother-in-law, the plumber. He's a licensed professional, he's not an engineer. And you misrepresented a casual conversation as a professional engineering assessment. Carol looked at the other board members. I move to table the well ordinance permanently and censure the president for misrepresentation. I second that, Frank said immediately. You can't censure me, Brenda sputtered. I'm the president. The board can absolutely censure the president, Frank said. It's in the bylaws. You'd know that if you actually followed them instead of making up rules as you go. The vote was 4-1, with only Brenda voting against. The well ordinance was dead and Brenda was officially censured. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt uneasy. Brenda Morrison didn't strike me as someone who accepted defeat gracefully. I was right to be worried. Over the next 2 weeks, I received violation notices almost daily. My mailbox was the wrong shade of black. My house numbers weren't properly aligned. My driveway had oil stains. My fence needed repainting. Each notice came with a fine ranging from $50 to $200. Richard Chen sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA, accusing them of harassment and demanding the fines be rescinded. In response, Brenda sent a letter threatening to place a lien on my property if the fines weren't paid. She's bluffing, Richard said when I called him in a panic. She can't place a lien for these kinds of petty violations, but she's hoping you don't know that. What do I do? We document everything and prepare for litigation. Because that's where this is heading. He was right. 3 weeks after the board meeting, I received a formal notice that the HOA was suing me for $12,000 in accumulated fines, penalties, and legal fees. $12,000? I stared at the legal documents in disbelief. How is that even possible? They're making things up, Richard said, reviewing the complaint. Look at this. They're claiming you violated architectural guidelines by making unauthorized modifications to your property. They're claiming those vegetable garden planters you installed constitute a structure requiring board approval. They're planters, wooden boxes. I know. But the HOA is arguing they're permanent structures because they're sitting on your property. It's nonsense, but it's expensive nonsense to fight. So what do? We file a response, we counterclaim for harassment and abusive process, and we go to court. But Yusuf, I need to be honest with you. This is going to cost money. I can work on a payment plan, but legal fees for something like this typically run $10,000 to $15,000. I felt sick. Fighting the HOA was going to cost as much as just giving in would have cost. There's one other thing, Richard said. I've been doing some research on Meadowbrook Estates. How much do you know about the development's water infrastructure? Just that it's connected to Carson City Municipal Water, right? But here's what's interesting. I pulled the development records from the county. When Meadowbrook Estates was built, the developer had to prove adequate water supply for the planned number of homes. They did that by demonstrating access to municipal water plus supplemental water rights from the original ranch property. Okay, so those supplemental water rights are attached to the well on your property. The developer retained those rights when they built the neighborhood because the municipal connection alone wasn't sufficient for the planned development size. According to the county records, your well is legally designated as a backup water source for the entire development. I blinked. What does that mean? It means your well isn't just serving your property. Legally speaking, it's part of the community water infrastructure. The developer built the system with the understanding that if municipal water failed or was insufficient, the development could draw from the well on what's now your property. Can they actually do that? Use my well? It's complicated. The water rights belong to whoever owns the property, which is you. But there's an easement recorded on the deed that gives the development access in emergencies. Did you know about that easement? No, the real estate agent never mentioned it. It's buried in the title documents. Most people don't read through all that carefully. Richard leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. This is interesting, very interesting. Why? Because if your well is legally part of the community water infrastructure, the HOA can't force you to cap it. Doing so would eliminate the backup water source that the development is legally required to maintain. But they're suing me for $12,000 in fines. I know. And here's where it gets fun. Let me make a few calls. I want to verify something with the county water authority. 3 days later, Richard called me back, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. Yusuf, you're not going to believe this. I spoke with the water authority. In 2023, there was a water main break on the municipal line that feeds Meadowbrook Estates. The development was without water for 3 days. I remember that. The HOA sent out notices telling everyone to conserve water, right? What they didn't tell everyone was that they reconnect the emergency feed from your well to supply water to the neighborhood during the outage. There are records of it with the water authority. They pulled thousands of gallons from your well over those 3 days. I felt my jaw drop. They used my well without telling me. Not just used it. According to the water authority records, they've been using it periodically for the past 2 years during peak demand periods in the summer. The municipal system can't quite handle the full load when everyone's watering lawns and filling pools in July and August. So they've been supplementing from your well. That's why they don't want me to cap it. Exactly. Brenda knows the development needs that well. If you cap it, they'll have to upgrade the municipal connection, which would cost the HOA hundreds of thousands of dollars. But she can't admit that, because it would undermine her whole position about forcing you to connect to municipal water. So she's trying to bully me into capping the well while simultaneously depending on it for the neighborhood's water supply. Welcome to HOA logic. But here's the best part. Nevada law requires compensation for water usage. If they've been drawing from your well without paying you, they owe you money. Potentially a lot of money. How much? Well, let's do some math. The water authority has records showing approximately 50,000 gallons drawn from your well over the past 2 years during peak periods in the emergency outage. Carson City residential water rates are about $8 per 1,000 gallons. So that's $400 in raw water costs. But Nevada law also requires fair compensation for the water right itself, not just the water. That's usually calculated as fair market value. I'd estimate the HOA owes you somewhere between $2,000 and $5,000. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had leverage. So what do we do with this information? We amend our counterclaim to include a claim for unjust enrichment and demand compensation for water usage. And we send a very polite letter to the HOA explaining that you're happy to continue providing backup water to the community, but you'll need a formal agreement and compensation. We'll offer them a reasonable rate. Say $3,000 annually for the easement and access rights. And if they refuse, then you're within your rights to cap the well since they've failed to maintain the easement agreement, which would force them to upgrade their municipal connection at enormous expense. Won't that hurt everyone in the neighborhood? Not your problem. They're the ones who decided to sue you instead of working this out reasonably. Richard drafted the amended counterclaim in the letter to the HOA. I signed them both with profound satisfaction. The response came faster than I expected. 5 days later, I got a phone call from Frank Peterson. "Yusuf, we need to talk. Can I come by your place?" He arrived 20 minutes later, looking tired. We sat on my porch and he got right to the point. "The board just had an emergency meeting. Your lawyer's letter caused quite a stir." I imagine it did. Most of the board had no idea we were drawing water from your well. Brenda knew, obviously. Turns out she's been managing the water system oversight herself and never reported the well usage to the rest of us. That seems like information the board should have had. No kidding. There's more. We pulled all the financial records. The HOA has been saving about $15,000 a year by using your well instead of upgrading the municipal connection. Brenda's been showing that as cost savings from her efficient management while trying to force me to cap the well, right, which would have immediately required that expensive upgrade, but she was hoping to blame the cost on you by claiming you created the problem by having a well in the first place. It's twisted logic, but that seems to be how her mind works. I shook my head. So what happens now? The board voted to drop the lawsuit immediately. We're also rescinding all the fines she assessed against you, and we want to negotiate a fair agreement for the water easement. Your lawyer suggested $3,000 a year. Is that acceptable? It's more than fair. The HOA should have been paying you all along. What about Brenda? Frank's expression hardened. The board is voting to remove her as president. What she did, hiding the well usage and filing a retaliatory lawsuit, that's breach of fiduciary duty. We're also considering whether to report her to the state HOA oversight office. There's an HOA oversight office? In Nevada, yes. They handle complaints about HOA board misconduct. What Brenda did is serious enough that she could be barred from serving on HOA boards in the future. Over the next week, things moved quickly. The HOA formally dropped their lawsuit. Richard negotiated a settlement agreement that included payment for the past 2 years of water usage, plus an ongoing annual fee for the easement rights. The total came to $7,000. With $3,000 annually going forward. More importantly, all the bogus fines were rescinded, and I received a formal apology from the board. Brenda Morrison was removed as HOA president by a vote of the board, then recalled entirely by a petition signed by over 60% of the neighborhood residents. Apparently, I wasn't the only person she'd been harassing. Once people realized she was vulnerable, complaints flooded in. She'd fined one family for having toys visible in their backyard. She'd threatened another homeowner with legal action because their house paint was half a shade off the approved color palette. She'd tried to ban holiday decorations that didn't meet her aesthetic standards. The list went on and on. The state HOA oversight office launched an investigation into her conduct. I provided documentation of the retaliatory fines and the well situation. Frank Peterson provided financial records showing she'd hidden the well usage from the board. Carol Singh provided emails showing Brenda had threatened board members who questioned her decisions. 3 months later, Brenda Morrison was officially barred from serving on any HOA board in Nevada for 5 years. The oversight office also fined her personally for breach of fiduciary duty. I ran into her once after that at the grocery store in Carson City. She saw me in the produce section and her face went bright red. For a moment I thought she might actually say something. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked rapidly in the other direction. Frank Peterson took over as HOA president. His first act was to revise the covenant enforcement procedures to prevent future harassment. The new rules required board approval for any fine over $50 and established an appeal process for residents who disagreed with violations. "We're supposed to be making the neighborhood better, not terrorizing people," Frank said at the first meeting under his leadership. "From now on, we're going to remember that." The formal water agreement was signed in September. I installed a meter on the well line that fed the neighborhood system so we could track actual usage. The HOA paid to upgrade the transfer system and add proper filtration. My well water, which had always been excellent, now flowed to the neighborhood through a modern, properly maintained system. Some of my neighbors apologized for not speaking up during the meetings when Brenda was going after me. "We should have said something," Linda Wu told me over the fence one afternoon. "We were just scared of becoming her next target." I get it, she was intimidating. Still, it wasn't right. You were the only one willing to stand up to her. I didn't really have a choice. She backed me into a corner. That's when people's true character shows. You fought back the right way. With documentation and lawyers and facts, not by becoming like her. That felt good to hear. Better than the $7,000 settlement check, even the neighborhood settled into a comfortable peace. The new board was reasonable and focused on actual community improvement instead of petty rule enforcement. They repaved the common areas, updated the playground equipment, and organized neighborhood events that people actually wanted to attend. I kept mowing my lawn, but now I kept it at a reasonable length instead of obsessing over exact measurements. I expanded my vegetable garden without worrying about violation notices. I even painted my front door a shade of blue that probably wasn't in the approved color palette, and nobody said a word. The well continued doing what it had done for 70 years, providing clean, reliable water. The difference was that now it served the entire community openly and fairly, with proper compensation and maintenance. The original ranch owner would have appreciated that, I thought. The well had always been meant to support the land and the people on it. One evening in late October, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when Richard Chen called. "How's retirement treating you?" I asked. He'd wrapped up my case and several others, then announced he was taking a long vacation. "It's not retirement, just a sabbatical. But I wanted to let you know the Brenda Morrison case has become something of a legend in HOA law circles. I've gotten calls from 3 other attorneys asking about the water rights angle. Glad my nightmare could be educational. It actually might help other people. There are a lot of developments in Nevada that were built on ranch land with existing wells. Your case established precedent that HOAs can't simply ignore existing water infrastructure for political reasons. Happy to contribute to legal precedent, I guess. There's one more thing. The State Oversight Office is using your case as an example in their HOA board training materials. They're specifically highlighting what not to do, using Brenda's conduct as a cautionary tale. So she's achieved immortality as an example of HOA corruption? Essentially, yes. I thought you'd enjoy knowing that. I did enjoy it. Quite a bit, actually. November brought the first snow to the Carson City area. Just a dusting that melted by afternoon, but enough to signal winter's approach. The well water flowed steadily, temperature controlled and reliable even as the weather changed. I'd had it tested again after all the upgrades, and the quality remained excellent. Frank Peterson stopped by to drop off the quarterly water usage report and payment. The HOA had drawn about 8,000 gallons during the quarter, less than I'd expected. "We've been working on conservation," he explained. "Turns out when people know the community is paying for water from your well, they're more conscious about usage. Who knew transparency would encourage responsibility? Imagine that, hey. Speaking of which, the board wanted me to run something by you. We're planning a community newsletter. We thought it would be good to include an article about the well and its history. The original ranch, how it's been serving the area for 70 years, the new agreement. Make it educational, show people where their water comes from. Would you be okay with that?" "Sure, as long as you don't make me sound like some kind of hero. I was just a guy who didn't want to pay $12,000 to cap a perfectly good well." Frank laughed. "Fair enough. But between you and me, standing up to Brenda took guts. A lot of people were grateful someone finally did it." The newsletter came out in December. The article about the well was thorough and well written, including historical photos of the original ranch that the county archives had provided. It explained how the well had been drilled in 1954, had served the ranch for decades, and now provided backup and supplemental water for the entire Meadowbrook Estates community. Several neighbors stopped me to say they'd enjoyed the article. A few admitted they'd had no idea where their water came from during the outage back in 2023. "I just thought we were conserving municipal water," one neighbor said. "I didn't realize we were running on your well. That must have been weird. Knowing the whole neighborhood was depending on your property, it was weirder not knowing about it," I replied. "At least now it's all above board." December turned to January, and the 1-year anniversary of Brenda's reign of terror ending came and went without fanfare. Life in Meadowbrook Estates was, for lack of a better word, normal. The HOA handled actual community needs like snow removal and common area maintenance. They stopped obsessing over lawn length and mailbox colors. Frank Peterson ran board meetings with efficiency and common sense. I paid my HOA dues without resentment because the fees were going toward actual services. The neighborhood looked good not because residents were terrorized into compliance, but because people took pride in their properties. It was a revolutionary concept. Treating adults like adults. One afternoon in February, I was replacing some boards on my back fence when Linda Wu called over from her yard. Yusuf, did you hear the news? What news? Brenda's moving. Her house went up for sale yesterday. I processed that information. Huh. Can't say I'm surprised. Apparently, she couldn't handle not being in charge. Frank said she tried to attend a board meeting last month to offer her input on covenant enforcement. He had to remind her she'd been recalled and wasn't welcome at board meetings anymore. That must have been awkward. I would have paid to see her face. Anyway, good riddance. Maybe whoever buys her place will be normal. The for sale sign went up in front of Brenda's house, which was 4 streets over from mine. I drove past it once out of curiosity. The sign advertised it as immaculate condition with premium HOA amenities. I wondered if the real estate agent knew about Brenda's history with those HOA amenities. The house sold in 3 weeks to a young couple from California. I met them at a neighborhood barbecue in March. They were friendly and normal and completely unaware of the drama that had preceded their arrival. Everyone's been so welcoming, the wife said. The HOA president brought us cookies and explained all the community resources. It's been great, glad to hear it. Welcome to the neighborhood. They'd bought Brenda's house for $40,000 less than she'd originally listed it for. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd been furious about having to reduce the price but desperate to move. She'd relocated to Reno, far enough away that we'd never accidentally run into each other at the grocery store again. Spring arrived, and with it came the annual water usage report. The HOA had used approximately 32,000 gallons from my well over the past year, primarily during summer peak periods. My $3,000 annual fee worked out to about $9 per 1,000 gallons, slightly above the municipal rate but fair compensation for the convenience and reliability. Frank brought the report to my house along with the annual payment. "System's working great," he said. "We haven't had any pressure issues, water quality is excellent, and having the backup capacity gives us security the municipal system alone couldn't provide. Happy to help. We're actually looking at doing something similar with another property. There's a house on Aspen Drive that has an old well. The owner never uses it, but the board's thinking about offering them a similar arrangement. Could give us even better backup capacity." Smart thinking. Diversify the supply, exactly. We learned a lot from this whole situation. Sometimes the best resources are the ones that were already there. In May, I got a letter from the state HOA Oversight Office thanking me for my cooperation in their investigation of Brenda Morrison. They reported that their findings had led to new regulations requiring greater transparency in HOA water management and stricter oversight of board president authority. "Your willingness to pursue this matter has resulted in meaningful reforms that will benefit homeowners across Nevada," the letter concluded. I put it in a folder with all the other documents from the case. Maybe someday it would be worth remembering in detail. For now, I was just glad it was over. The well kept pumping water the way it had for 70 years. The neighborhood kept functioning like a normal community instead of a dictatorship. My lawn grew to whatever length it wanted within reason and nobody threatened to sue me. Sometimes I thought about what would have happened if I'd just given in, spent the $12,000 to cap the well and connect to municipal water. The neighborhood would have lost its backup water supply. I would have been out a huge amount of money. Brenda would have continued her reign of terror unchecked, and the HOA would never have learned that their greatest asset was something they'd been trying to destroy. Instead, standing up to unreasonable demands had exposed corruption, reformed a broken system, and created a fair arrangement that benefited everyone. Not a bad outcome for refusing to back down from a bully with a clipboard. Frank Peterson was re-elected as HOA president that spring with 90% of the vote. At the annual meeting, he gave a brief speech about community values and working together. He mentioned, almost in passing, that the previous administration had faced challenges but that the neighborhood had emerged stronger. "We learned that good leadership isn't about control," he said. "It's about service. It's about making decisions that benefit the whole community, not just enforcing rules for their own sake. I think we're on the right path now." The applause was genuine and sustained. Looking around the room, I saw people who seemed actually happy to be at an HOA meeting. That might have been the most remarkable change of all. After the meeting, several people thanked me again for taking on Brenda. I deflected the praise, pointing out that I'd mostly just been trying to avoid spending $12,000. But I understood what they meant. Sometimes standing up to unreasonable authority requires one person to go first. I'd been that person, mostly by accident, and it had worked out. Summer arrived, hot and dry like summers in Nevada tend to be. The well supplied supplemental water during peak usage periods, just as it was supposed to. The neighborhood stayed green and comfortable. The system worked exactly as it should have worked all along. I expanded my vegetable garden again, adding tomatoes and peppers and squash. No violation notices appeared. No one measured my lawn with a ruler. My garbage cans sat behind their screen where they'd always been, bothering exactly no one. In July, I got an email from Richard Chen asking if I'd be willing to be interviewed for an article he was writing about HOA disputes for a legal journal. I agreed, and we spent an hour on the phone talking through the case. "What's the main lesson you took from all this?" he asked. I thought about it. Document everything, know your rights, and don't back down from bullies just because they have official-sounding authority. That's good. Anything else? Yeah. Sometimes the solution to a problem is already there. You just have to stop trying to destroy it long enough to see how it works. That's profound. Can I quote you on that? Sure, why not? The article came out in August. Richard sent me a copy. It was technical and full of legal terminology, but the core message was clear. HOA boards need oversight, homeowners need to understand their rights, and existing infrastructure often has value that short-sighted administrators fail to recognize. The well story became something of a legend in Meadowbrook Estates. New residents heard about it during their orientation meetings with the board. It was presented as an example of how conflicts could be resolved fairly when both sides approached the situation reasonably. The fact that one side had to be forcibly removed from power before reasonable resolution was possible got mentioned less frequently, but everyone who'd lived through it remembered. Life settled into comfortable routine. The HOA functioned the way it was supposed to, maintaining common areas and enforcing sensible rules without harassing residents. The well provided water when needed, properly compensated and maintained. My property values stayed strong, thank you very much. Despite or maybe because of the well that Brenda had claimed would hurt the neighborhood, on the 2-year anniversary of the day Brenda had showed up at my door with her clipboard and her grass measuring obsession, I made a point of measuring my lawn. It was 3.5 inches tall in spots, definitely over the regulation length she'd tried to enforce. Nobody cared. Nobody measured it. Nobody fined me. The grass grew, I mowed it when it got too long, and life went on. Revolutionary. I stood in my yard that evening, listening to the well pump cycling on somewhere below ground. 70 years of reliable service, and it was still going strong. It had outlasted the ranch, outlasted the original owners, and definitely outlasted Brenda Morrison's attempt to destroy it. Some things were worth fighting for. Property rights, fair treatment, and the right to tell petty tyrants to back off were apparently among them. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, through months of stress and thousands of dollars in legal fees. But I'd learned it thoroughly. The sun set over the Nevada hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere in Reno, Brenda Morrison was probably measuring someone's lawn or planning her next campaign of harassment. That was her problem now. I had my well, my property, my peace, and my $3,000 annual check from the HOA. Sometimes, standing your ground led to everyone getting what they needed. It had taken a lawsuit, a recall, and a state investigation to get there. But we'd arrived. The well water tasted especially good that evening. Like victory, only wetter.